Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel. We've got a returnee. Yes, some people do come back for more. Annie Love, who is going to be chatting with us. She's all the way over in Canada at the moment, British Columbia. That's in Canada, isn't it? I almost said America. That she would have come down the wires and beat the crap out of me if I'd said America. So I've learned my lesson around that stuff these days. But it's great to have Annie back, who's been somebody who's popped in on a regular basis to the show and who I've known for many years, have a lot of respect and affection for, and who gave us one of the most amazing shows ever when her bins came to be collected once when she was in, was it Central America?
Costa Rica. Yeah.
We still talk about that show as you're looking horrified at this guy trying to stop him from coming in. And we're like, it's fine, don't worry, just get your bins sorted out.
Yeah.
That pandemic.
That's the beauty of going live.
It was great, wasn't it? It was great. So we still got that. I'll see if James can find the clip and he can insert it in at the end or something. So that if you're looking horrified. And we did another one when you lived in a mobile home, one of those silver
Airstream. Yep. I spent a year in my Airstream. That was another adventure.
And we were praying that it wouldn't rain because it's quite noisy when it rains in one of those. So, yep. And now it looks like you're in an actual house, which is extraordinary.
Yes, I mean, I've always lived in a home. It was an adventure during COVID to just be in the woods in my Airstream, which was it was a really beautiful gift, actually. But yes, now I've settled on the Sunshine Coast, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world. I can see the ocean out my front window, out my side windows. There's a beautiful mountain. I've got a forest behind me and lakes all behind me as well.
That's enough of that. I'm ending the show. I'm too jealous.
Sorry. Sorry.
You do that to everybody, don't you? Just to wind them up.
Pretty much. Well, I invite everyone to come, so you're always welcome to come.
I'm definitely, I'm on the next flight over, mate. That's it. Let's see if you can deal with a smelly Irishman turning up. So it genuinely is lovely to have you back and to see you. It's nice to home. And sort of, for people who don't know your background, do you want to sort of tell us a little bit about your sort of growing up and stuff so that people who are new to you can have a sense of who you are?
Of course. So, I grew up in a crazy dysfunctional alcoholic home.
Yeah.
I became...
All the best people did, Annie.
Yes, I agree. I'm starting to think that might really be the truth. I got into, I would say, all the dissociative and numbing out things pretty early, found candy, found cigarettes, found drinking at 14, dabbled in drugs, but mostly alcohol was my main numbing agent, shopping, you name it. Lots of unhealthy relationships in my younger years. I was a DJ for many years. That fueled the party lifestyle for a long time. I grew up in Toronto, moved to Vancouver when I was in my early 20s. So I've been on the west coast of Canada for about 30 years now, and got married even in my years of being, I will say, unconscious. That's sort of how I really like to look at it now, is instead of focusing on the behaviors, was really just, what was I like? And I think that's really what it comes down to. I was asleep, I was unconscious walking around in my life. Finally woke up literally August 22nd, 2008. Suddenly, for whatever reason, realized that alcohol needed to be done. Not because I had lost everything or anything, but rather because I just finally saw like what a detrimental effect it was having on my life. And it came in this really big flash, not like, so many people, they realize they have a problem, they try to stop, they can't, or they try to get help, they don't, they do, they, stop, start, all that stuff. For me, it was like a lightning bolt. And I went off to treatment 2 days later, and that was it for me. It was not an easy journey. I'd say that actually my friend Catherine and I were talking about this the other day. I would say that my life actually became quite a bit more difficult in recovery when there was no longer the anesthetizing possible, and mostly the things
that makes sense, actually.
right.
There was a reason why you were using.
Well, yeah, and so but my marriage didn't last. I got was going through a separation and eventual divorce very, very early in my recovery, and changed jobs after a few years. I had been working a very high stress, high pressure project management, IT project management for years, and that didn't fit anymore once I got into recovery. So I changed careers. I started working in the recovery field in 2011, and my life
go
really
back a bit before you go to that, and then we'll
sure,
move forward to that. So, tell me, you use an interesting term, dissociative. What does that mean? Can you tell me about that? From your perspective, I don't
yes,
know the
yeah, well, that's why, right? It's
definition.
and that's a perfect example, right? That's exactly what I've done probably my whole life is, I'm talking about myself to you as if I'm talking about somebody else. And that's my safety place, right? It's like, it's still a lot of the time, still too painful to talk about it from my own perspective and to be in my body and in my feelings as I'm speaking about it. So it's something that I think I've done since a very early age, is to dissociate from my feelings, from my body. I existed, thankfully, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, gave me a good brain. The brain works very well. It's very good at keeping me safe and all the rest of it. So, that's why I feel like today my view on what was going on with me is less to do with, was I ever physically addicted to alcohol? No. Did I ever drink every day and couldn't live without a drink? No. But I learned so many unhealthy coping strategies, alcohol being a primary one. And now that I'm aware of that, and I have much more conscious awareness of what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and actually in the moment, not just sort of like an hour later or 3 days later or many years later, I can stay present mostly. But if you hadn't stopped me there, I would have just kept speaking about myself as if I was talking about somebody else. So it's interesting that either you picked up on it or just that you wanted to, to touch on that topic. But pausing and actually thinking about what I'm saying to you and talking about my life it was awful, right? Like my childhood was awful. There was so much uncertainty, so much unpredictability. There was my dad was a active alcoholic until he died when I was 11. And my mom was so busy taking care of him and trying to make sure his messes got cleaned up that I was like, and I was an only child, so I didn't have anybody, right? I was like this lone wolf in my room, reading, listening to music. And again, those things were very, they didn't end up being terrible things as in terms of, things to get lost in. It could have been much worse.
Fantasy is often a thing that a child will go into. Like Tolkien is a classic example, and stories like that, particularly kids who are smart, will do a lot of reading.
And that's what I mean. Like I think it's I became an avid reader. Read well beyond my what most kids would be reading. And I love to read because yes, I think it was a safe other world to go to, and just to not have to think and be present. It's just that now, now that I'm aware of that, when I look back on it, I think of how sad that little girl must have been, but didn't have any way, with two emotionally immature parents. I've been hearing a lot about this topic, not that it was, or that terminology, emotionally immature parents. Something else that's interesting, and we can talk about it after, is, I made a conscious decision last year, this time, to stop speaking to my mother.
Okay.
And I still haven't spoken to her, but I've been.
Was that a breath you needed to take there?
Yeah, a breath.
Was there a breath that you needed? Or did you need to sort of just breathe on that one a little bit, maybe.
Well, I need to breathe when I'm talking about my mother, and I need to breathe when I'm, talking about the fact that I'm not talking to her, because both of those things are challenging, right? And societally, it does not, most people do not understand my decision. And I get these very interesting little voices from friends or different people that, she's 90 years old. Is this really how you? No, of course I would feel terrible if she were to pass away during this period of silence. And I would also say that I needed this pause, and I needed to.
There's a lot of stuff there, so I'm going to just slow us down a bit.
Okay.
Take a bit of time, because that's a lot of stuff, and we're not here to do therapy, but we are here to listen. And as you know, this show's about being safe and supporting people in the decisions that they've made and what works for them. My interest in talking about the dissociation was simply because I've not, until you said it, I genuinely not heard somebody refer to those coping strategies as what they are. Ways of supporting dissociation. Dissociation, technically, is an emotional cognitive state that a human being goes into because they're overwhelmed. And it often involves things like numbing out, physical numbing out, not being able to feel. And it's often connected to self-harming behaviors such as cutting or hitting yourself or hitting a wall and all that sort of stuff. But it's really interesting. I thought it was a very insightful comment on your part to talk about the use of sugar as disassociating, the use of alcohol as disassociating, because of course that makes a lot of sense, even though they're not in the textbooks. It intuitively seems absolutely spot on, to be honest. That's why I wanted to come back to it. So I had no I'm not a mind reader or anything like that. So I was just like, oh, that's interesting point. And I think a very insightful comment on those types of behaviors, because they're designed to try to manage what is unmanageable. It's not possible for a child to manage highly dysfunctional parents. That's not what children are designed to do, right? It's meant to be the other way around. Okay? And just for anybody listening, you're not meant to parent your parents until you're older and have the capacity, and maybe they've got dementia. That's a different story. But as a child, one is supposed to be safely dependent on responsible adults who will nurture us and teach us and help us grow, meet our developmental milestones. They're not supposed to just drop us from a great height, sort of watch us smash. That's not what they're supposed to do. But that is sort of what happened to you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any animosity towards either of my parents. I've done enough, 12-step work, therapy, and all the rest of it to really, and not, I used to say it with with that sort of hint of sarcasm of, they did the best that they could with the tools that they had, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that's not, but now I know that it actually really, really is the truth, that they were traumatized themselves. They had no idea. And I read it. I've been reading Nicole LePera's book, How to Do the Work, in a book study right now. And this chapter that we're reading on trauma. And again, it's, so much more understanding now than we've ever had before. There was this one quote in it about parents, and it's funny because I hadn't thought that this would be the topic today, but this idea of, not talking to your parents or for a period of time, taking a break or whatever it is. I think if I really understand that they did the best that they could, and that they're, that they were just projecting their unprocessed trauma onto me, that it doesn't actually do any good for me to then in turn project it right back at them. So
that's right.
If I'm doing the work, which I am, and if I'm working in my recovery as much as I am, then, I guess for me, it's about the boundaries, right? And we can talk about boundaries and all the different ways that applies. But right now with my mom, there was things that she was doing last year around this time that were in direct violation of boundaries that I had set with her many years before. And it took a long time, but she did finally start to not break those and not step over them. And then she started again. And that's when I chose to, I wrote her a letter. I didn't, just stop talking to her. I wrote her a letter. I explained it all. But my mom's biggest, I was going to say fault. It's not a fault. Her mechanism is denial.
Mm-hmm.
And she seems incapable, even though I wrote her a very clear, it was short, but it was very to the point. This is why, this is what happened. This is why. And, but she left me a voicemail shortly after receiving the letter, saying something like, "Oh, menopause must be really hard. Sounds like you're going through a really hard time." And that was her response. That was her response to my letter. No responsibility, no accountability, no acknowledgement. And so that part, I think, is the hardest part as a child for me still, as her, even though I'm adopted. I forgot to say that in my story. I think that's a big piece of the puzzle pieces, if you will, is being adopted. Is no matter how wonderful it is for the parents who want a child and can't have one, and as wonderful as it is for a 16-year-old young girl to have a place to place a baby when she doesn't want to, by her own choice, do other things. It's still, we understand now just how traumatic that is for both the mother and the child. And just, it's, doesn't matter how nurturing the home is. And of course, I'm friends and very close to my mom and my half brother and sister now. And it's wonderful to have them in my life. But I think you and I have talked about this before. It's there's a disconnection that I don't even know how to explain, because I've never had it. I've never been raised by the people who gave birth to me, and then I met them when I was an adult, and now they're more like friends.
The most difficult thing, I think, to explain is an absence, because it just isn't there. How do you explain that? It's like, do you know what I mean? We're so relational as animals. It's really difficult to relate to absence, apart from quite traumatically, really, and quite sort of in a very frightened manner. How are you feeling? You all right?
Yeah, I mean,
are you looking after yourself in this conversation?
Well, I have my my lovely emotional support dog on my lap.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. I'm trying to not go somewhere else. I want to stay here. If I have some tears, I know that's fine and welcome here. It doesn't. Yeah.
As long as you keep yourself safe, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, back to what we were just saying. I mean, I think that's what dissociation is. It's my way of keeping myself safe. And I know I can
have other tools.
Yeah. When you don't have other tools. These days I have much better tools, right? I have yoga and breath work and therapy and somatic experiencing. And, I've worked, I don't know if we talked since I did the ketamine program last year, and I don't want to, get too far down the road into psychedelics, but I'm sure there's lots of people who, approve and don't approve for their various reasons. The therapist that I've been working with for many years now, as with somatic experiencing, encouraged me to explore this as a modality of healing, and it was really quite profound. And again, not advertising, I'm not promoting, I'm just saying, for me it was a very and interestingly, because ketamine is specifically a dissociative. So when she told me about it, I thought, why would you give someone who dissociates a dissociative? But it had, I guess, almost like the reverse effect of allowing me to get in touch with some.
We should say, just for health and safety reasons, what you're talking about is medically prescribed, a controlled microdosing with specially trained professionals. You're not talking about going and scoring some ketamine on the street.
No, never. No. This is
the same with psychedelics, full stop. I mean, it is a whole subject, and I'm a great fan of them in terms of when they are used appropriately and correctly under controlled circumstances in microdoses with specially trained psychotherapists, what they do, all these psychedelics, is get someone into a deep state of relaxation around stuff that it was not possible to relax around. And when you get into that deep state of relaxation, you can relate to the person about this stuff, right?
Exactly.
That's what happened. So this thing that was unrelatable, which would trigger a defensive disassociation because it's unrelatable and horrific and terrifying, becomes manageable. And it becomes manageable in the way that we are designed to manage things, which is in a relationship to another safe human being. Right. Now, that is really important for people to understand that. So don't go and munch on mushrooms in some field somewhere and think that that's therapy. That's not. But to be honest, I think, coming back to your very insightful point about chemically assisted dissociation through sugar and alcohol and other substances, in many ways, I would say many people have been trying to manage through these things. That's what happens, right?
Yeah, that's precisely what it is. I mean, Gabor Mate and many other people, I think, at this point are speaking very clearly about how these coping mechanisms, strategies, if you will, were survival techniques. It's the brain was doing exactly what the brain is supposed to do when things are overwhelming. It's to find a way to feel safe. And if dissociation or numbing or whatever else is keeps you safe, then it's actually, it's unfortunate that, of course, the substances then become, physically or whatever way dependent for people. And then, of course, we end up with addiction and all the other things. But it's
some people end up with addiction.
Some people, yeah, of course, not everybody.
So, I mean, we don't need to really get into that debate, but very simply put, for people who are listening, some people's makeup in their brain is such that, particularly around dopamine and damage to their D2 receptors, that if you start sort of using substances, they will hijack what is already a damaged brain anyway, and you'll get an addict simply by using. But that's not true of the vast majority of people who substance misuse because they're trying to manage. They don't. I mean, as soon as you deal with the problem with the vast majority of people, give them better tools, substance misuse stops. That's not true of an addict. I'll just carry on. And it's like, it's a real roll of the dice, I think, folks. You're better off not using. I would also say this, and I don't know what you think about it, that it's also, if we truly accept that people are trying to cope, we should understand that just saying to people prohibitively stop, it's like insane.
Exactly why it doesn't work. It's precisely why it doesn't work.
And somebody will kill themselves, and that's my experience. And so people who are misusing substances or alcohol should be thoughtful about why they are misusing and make sure they get appropriate support to stop. And it's a good idea to stop, but
of course,
within a supportive, safe environment, really. So I just want to say all of that stuff. Also, I mean, maybe we'll go into the recovery. Hello, sweetheart. That's all right. You can join in the conversation.
No, he heard something that interested him.
Okay, not this conversation. It's like, oh, Mum's talking about that stuff again.
It's his favorite. But you were going to say, let's go into
this sort of recovery thing, because I think there's a connection here in that I know some of the changes that you've made in your life and this use of psychedelics and your reorientation around your own misuse of substances. I'm guessing I know what the story is, but let's see if I'm right. So you come into recovery, and what does recovery mean technically? Sort of rather than fancy pants, what does it mean to you?
Well, it's interesting. I think I really like the word you just used, and it's something I may start incorporating when I'm telling my story. But I think exactly what I did was reorient myself in every way to people, to myself, to whatever the greater thing is out there. And it's taken, it was 15 years in August since I came into recovery. So
Congratulations, Annie.
That has really changed, right? Like where I was at day 1 of recovery compared to like year 5, year 10, and where I am now is different. And lately, most lately, I would say this year, there has been a reorientation to how I even view, what addiction is. And that's why it's not for anybody else. Like I really believe that there are many pathways and everyone has a different story, and they're entitled to that story and to their path. Yes, most people who abuse substances and become addicted, or qualify as having substance use disorder, if we want to use the proper terminology these days, each have their, what's true for them. And for my birthday last year, I got "To Thine Own Self Be True" tattooed on my forearm, not because of its use within 12-step programs and fellowships, but just because for me, to be able to talk, I can talk about it here with you about the psychedelic use, but if I was to share about that in the
I know
AA,
there'd be a riot.
I'd be,
even though one of the founders exactly that,
exactly used LSD.
But that's another. So what I mean by
other subject,
give people information first, Annie. Just I want to give people who are listening who don't understand these terms a bit of information. So recovery is a term that's used. So it sort of has become attached to this thing called 12-step recovery. There are other forms of recovery, but within this context, that's what we mean. And generally in the field, it means abstinence-based approaches to substance misuse and alcohol misuse. Okay. And that's what 12-step means. And 12-step, for people who don't know, is started by a group called Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's called 12-step because there are 12 steps in their program to help people stop using, stay stopped, deal with their own sort of psychological distress, form better relationships, and become productive and meaningful members of society. Now, that's the theory. Quite a lot of people don't become productive members of society, but that's okay. They're safe enough because they're not using, and that's better off for them and for the world. But that was that roughly right? Would you say, Annie? Would you add anything to that sort of bare bones explanation?
Well, I mean, that's yes and no. I mean, that is what I mean when I say I am currently reorienting myself.
Yes. I understand that you're currently reorienting.
To what it means.
Give people knowledge.
Yeah. But the very, yes, in the world, I would say, most people, especially those who are in the 12-step fellowships, whether it's NAAA or all the other ones that have come out of that original first
over
program.
200 of them now, Annie.
Right. They are of the, I guess, I don't know if it's, if it's what's subliminally said or if it's how, I don't know, but to equate recovery to a specific program isn't accurate, I don't think. And I think that's the one part where I've, and I've done a lot of work around advocacy. We can talk about, where things went professionally, but that was the big thing, was to get people within the 12-step fellowships to understand that recovery is not synonymous with a 12-step program. Yeah. It's one of the ways to find recovery, but recovery will be self-defined. And, different organizations out of the US like SAMHSA and, they've taken the word abstinence right out of it, because it doesn't always equal abstinence for people. It does for many. And I'll say it should, in air quotes, for many people who should, I'll define as meaning like it would be much more helpful for them to be in abstinence than to continue to try to manage certain things in their lives while still using. And I think that still the people who are still actively using need the same amount of compassion and respect, because their lives still are, very important.
And also, I would include people who are prescribed substance abuse substitutes, so methadone replacement therapy, for example, which has caused big trauma and big debates amongst the various bags of squalling cats that exist in various 12-step recovery groups. But, you know, as a professional and as a person, I would tell you that it's very difficult to manage an opiate issue without substitutes.
Exactly. And so until we start looking at the whole, you know, at everyone as people first, right? Like that's why the language has become so important, not to refer to people as alcoholics or addicts, or, you know, junkies or all those other negative terminologies, but to say, you know, people first language became such a big topic in the last, I don't know, 25 years in the US anyway. And in Canada, we've been trying, you know, to get these things. So, you know, recovery, yes, I'll define it again. Absolutely. Or, you know, bettering your life in whatever way, and, you know, becoming a productive member of society, you know, for a lot of people, I think that's a big thing. If their lives were, let's say, you know, or somehow were connected to crime or to any, you know, not being taxpayers or whatever it was that they might have been doing if their addiction went that far. But I think about all the people, and this is a big one. I don't know how you feel about this, but I've been thinking a lot lately about all those people who do not qualify as having a substance use disorder yet, who may be in that problem area drinking or using, but they're not, they, you know, they wouldn't, based on the diagnostic tools, they wouldn't qualify. Like what's for those people? What do they need to find a better life, you know? Because there's way more of those people than there are.
Absolutely. And also it's really dumb to wait until you have a huge problem.
Exactly.
It's really dumb attitude. So in terms of alcohol, I've got a very simple line. There isn't really a safe use of alcohol, and people don't like that statement, but it's a fact.
It's now Canada is leading the way with this. You'll be happy.
I know, it's amazing.
Our new guidelines say that no amount of alcohol is safe.
Right. And I remember when that came out earlier this year, and also research came out in the UK earlier this year, which demonstrated a direct link between cancer and alcohol. It's always thought that alcohol was a secondary cause. Now we understand
it's actually a carcinogen.
It changes your DNA structure and gives you cancer. It's that simple. It's the same as smoking cigarettes now. It's on the same level of risk. So the alcohol use guidelines by the various national countries, Ireland is going to change its labeling around alcohol.
I heard that. Yes.
And put the same labels on it as they have on cigarettes, because that's the truth. So for alcohol, I think that there is no safe use, but at the same time, if you have some form of dependence on alcohol, I would strongly urge you to seek professional advice to deal with it. You know, the reality is that, and we only have to vaguely glance around what's going on in the world at the moment. Some people have awful experiences in life, and there just aren't enough qualified psychologists to be parachuted into every individual's life. And so I profoundly have respect for how people cope and survive. That's where I come from, you know, and not tell people off and say you're bad because you did something that got you through something. And definitely don't tell yourself off for that, whatever you do. Just have compassion for yourself. In terms of definitions of recovery, I suppose the one I work on most is recovery is available if you think about how you can maximize your own potential in any particular situation. I'm very interested in, for example, things like lifestyle medicine and the 4 pillars of health that they have, which is good sleep, good stress management tools, a good diet, and exercise.
Exactly.
Those 4 things, you try and put those into your life. If you ask me to reduce it down to just one change that will really significantly improve things for you, it's exercise. That's where the evidence is, you know. If you can get to do exercise 3 times a week, raise your heartbeat for 20 minutes, that will have a huge impact on improving your health and well-being. So that's where I come from, you know, as a health practitioner. In terms of recovery and abstinence, I would question whether or not the supposed abstinence step, which is step 1, is actually about abstinence, really, anyway, because it doesn't say that. I think what it asks people to do is think about a healthy relationship to this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what somebody's healthy relationship. I can't prescribe somebody's healthy relationship to that thing. I can work with them and respect their journey and their decisions around that healthy relationship to that thing. And I think that's a truer version of those steps than the one that's come to take over, particularly with things like the How program, which are rigid and doctrinaire sort of applications of somebody else's shit. As far as I could see, it's somebody else's stuff.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
No,
and so recovery, I think of as why don't you work on as an individual? Why doesn't any individual work on the bits of their life that they can work on improving for their own selfish self-improvement, their own health and well-being? That's what I look at it. And I look at it in the same view, say, for example, some of the patients I've got who have severe and enduring mental health problems like psychosis. Recovery is available within that, but you're not going to magically be cured of your psychosis. That ain't happening, right? Mm-hmm. It's like silly. It's silly magical thinking involved in that sort of stuff. So abstinence is absolutely appropriate for some people around certain things, without a doubt. And I would also, and it's not for me to say, but I'm interested in the abstinence from unhealthy relationships, which you've been mentioning. And again, I understand that can be an extraordinarily healthy decision for both sides of the equation, to be honest. As a recovery decision, that's a gift to give to somebody else as well. So I wouldn't be judgmental about it because, like, I ain't God. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? And who is?
Yeah.
Right? So I'm interested in those. That's where I sit, Annie, within all this stuff.
Yeah, and I think, again, you said it, and this is the name of your show, and this is where I go with all of what you just said, is like, I don't really, well, I'll be blunt. I don't really identify as being in recovery anymore. I don't because in the ways that it's been associated with other things, because I don't associate with myself with those things anymore. And it doesn't mean that I wouldn't say that anyone who is struggling with alcohol use disorder, misuse, anything like that, shouldn't go to AA and try it and see if it works for them, because it certainly helped me, and it was certainly a big part of my early journey in my, I call it like well-being. That's really what we're talking about. How can I have the healthiest and most whole healthy life for myself? And to me, those 4 pillars you just talked about, and it's interesting because I watched, so many different ways that I approach health and stuff in my life. And, so I listened to, say, Andrew Huberman's, he did a show the other day on mental health toolkit. And guess what the first 6 things were? Exactly the ones that you just said, plus a couple of other ones, which had to do with social connection and whatever. But yeah. It's like religion. Everybody's fighting over it, but the reality is we're all saying the same thing. We know that what well-being looks like. We know that it includes, getting the right amount of sleep, proper nutrition, exercise, and social connection for people is huge. And so to me, I would much rather associate myself with a person who's on a path to well-being than on a path to recovery, because I don't think I ever had, prior to now, the wherewithal, the awareness, any of it to say that I want back. Like, if recovering literally means like to get something back that I lost, well, maybe connection to myself and to the greater universe and stuff might have been something that I was born with and lost in the shuffle of all the stuff that happened. But really, I just don't feel, and it's interesting because, of course, any of my recovery, so-called friends that are in that world of recovery would hear me say this. But some of them, I'm sure, would be like, "What? You don't consider?
You're going to start using it again? Whoa!"
Oh, all of that.
That'll be where it goes.
Don't even get me started on the fear and the dogma.
I sort of whatever. whatever.
But I mean, you know, 15 years into this, I've got all my life, you know, I've spent 12 years working in the field. I've got 15 years of going to, you know, being around people who are mostly, not all, but mostly in 12-step recovery and other things. But just, it's so interesting, right? To be at this place now where if I say that, I'm like, I'm putting it out there. And I read, you know, another friend of, you probably know her as well. I won't say her name because, well, she posted it publicly, but still a friend of ours posted on LinkedIn the other day that she had changed her relationship to this whole thing and had started socially drinking again. Oh, can't wait to hear what the 12-step fellowships have to say about that, even though, you know, her relationship, her problematic relationship was to a different substance. But again, so I don't want to, all I'm saying is, to me, well-being is a much, much better goal and way of defining what we're really talking about, because recovery, because of its exactly what we just talked about, because of its association to being about abstinence or being about a specific program, when really it's not. Like, what are we really talking about? What are we, you know?
I think interesting. And then we're going to drop the subject because I want to be aware of time, because I've got to rush off to do something. And coming to the end of the show anyway. But just thinking about like, final point on this thing is that the founders of that program were very thoughtful in saying that the program was not the answer to alcoholism, not the answer, the only answer, and it certainly wasn't the answer to life, the universe, and everything in any way, shape, or form. And I think there is a conversion problem. People get converted to something. Personally, I think it's because for so many people it saves their life, and then it can feel like a betrayal if they somehow move beyond that framing, which is fine. I don't judge that. You know, if you need that emotional prop, that's cool. And it gives people a good standard of life that otherwise wouldn't achieve it. So there's no question.
And so, yeah, exactly. I have nothing but respect for it. Nothing but respect for it. So nothing that I've said up until this point today was about, this is why the definition of recovery needs to be broader, to make sure that it includes everyone's path being respected. And you know, again, how we view people who struggle it needs to be seen through that compassionate lens. And tying it back to my story is understanding that all of the pain and the trauma and the things that I endured and the ways that I coped with it saved me for a long time until I could do something different. And now I do something different. Yeah.
Same story. And you're at a point where I know that you've had something of a burnout and you've left the recovery field and you're moving on in terms of professionally. What does that look like? I mean, you know, burnout is so horrible. Where are you at in that? Where are you as a person, and what's your next steps?
You know, so just, quick little history for people. So I worked in the treatment world for a number of years in a few different capacities, mostly around, you know, communications and, you know, marketing, business development roles. And then, you know, did some courses, did some, you know, intervention training and recovery coach training, et cetera, and did that for a while, you know. And then because of COVID, everything changed, obviously, for all of us in different ways. And you know, I'd always had the side project with the advocacy work. So I was still doing some consulting and different project things. But you know, what really I think happened for me is my own awareness of my nervous system is such now that I cannot place myself in situations where I am too close to people who are in the absolute dire mental health crises times. And so, you know, my last role as a sober companion back a few months ago, and, you know, it's no fault of that person's struggle is their struggle. It's just that afterwards, it was like another sort of awareness moment, you know, very clearly it's time to take a break, you know, after giving lots and lots of energy towards my own journey, towards helping other people on their journeys and working in the field. It was a lot. And I use the term burnout just to sort of, you know, I don't really necessarily mean that everyone who works in this field will burn out. However, it's been my vantage point of working in those different positions within it is to say that a lot of people do, because it's very demanding. It's very demanding on your emotions. And I think, you know, without starting a whole other topic, if we wanted to go down the codependence thing, for me, what I watched myself do was in early recovery, you know, being a sponsor in 12-step fellowships was to, you know, try and save all those people. I was going to become a counselor, did the courses, and then was like, nope, I am far too codependent at this point, worked hard on my codependence. But I think the overarching theme of working in this field is you have to be doing your own work to make sure that you're not, you know, just focusing on other people's problems in order to not focus on your own, or to get so sucked into, you know, the situation. So is part of it my own still work that I need to do around boundaries and stuff like that? Probably. And I would also just say that it's been a really welcome break. So earlier this year, I reconnected with my person. We met originally when we were 17 and 19. So we began a relationship this year, and his love is of food, of many things, but food. And we started this food business this summer, and we continue to work on that. And it's just a nice change is what I'll say. It's still very busy and very time consuming. But it's different because it's not about, other people's emotional states. And it, you know, yes, there's those moments of, you know, hurrying up or doing things at a frantic pace, but it's much more manageable for me than say being, with somebody trying to, you know, keep them calm and from having another breakdown, or keeping someone, you know, safe from alcohol, etc. It's just been a nice change.
And I mean, you know, where I come from on all of this is, I mean, I'm just delighted for you that you're guessing what you want in your life, and you have love, because you are a loving and lovable person. And of course, absolutely, that should be part of your life. I think one of the sort of perspectives I have in response or thinking about what you're saying is that particularly the 12-step recovery world is incestuous. And people go down the rabbit hole, and it can be quite hurtful. And it's interesting, I think, and I don't know if you pondered this, but this move about having boundaries around your mom that are realistic to what she can cope with. She can't cope with a lot, so you don't give her a lot. It's like, that just makes a lot of sense to me. That's reality, right? That's not punishment or anything. That's just the acknowledgement of the truth. And that somehow seems to be paralleled or part of the story around the 12-step recovery groups, and you moving beyond that into other things and leaving that part of your career there, and sort of having, you know, what you need and what you want. And good luck to you on that one, it seems to me. And again, I think it's really important that for all of us, and you mentioned this really interesting word, codependency, that there's a certain amount of codependency in all human beings. I think that we might...
we're wired for connection, right? We need it, and all the rest of it.
Also, selflessness is a form of codependency. When we put somebody else before us, but then we do that, and that's okay. It's when that's hijacked and manipulated into extremes that it becomes a problem. But I think it can feel like, for those that are maybe in a different place in their life, that when we make decisions to move somewhere else emotionally or professionally, it can feel like we're judging, but of course we're not. And it's really important, I think, within this context of codependency, and those of us that have had complicated, broken, difficult, challenging, dangerous relationships, that we allow ourselves to move on. Because the one thing that we're really bad at doing is moving on.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The one thing that we need to do is move on. So I'm really inspired by your story, Annie, as always. I mean, it's extraordinary, the courage and the vision that you have, and the fact that you don't just talk it, you do the walk as well. It's beautiful, and I'm really happy for you. You know, and I'm as a compassionate human being, I understand how tough it is, right? So Thank you for being here. I have to come. We have to finish, unfortunately.
No problem.
But we might come back another time and talk more about codependency if you're into that.
I would love that. I would love that. It's
all right. Well, I'll
fascinating
get Teresa to reach out to you. For people who don't know,
Wonderful.
Teresa does all the hard work on this show. I just come up and pretend to be pretty. That's it. And she does all the graft. So, but anyway, you stay there. I'm gonna say goodbye to everybody. And it's been really wonderful to have Annie back. And if you've got questions, we'll put links to websites and things like that. But do send through questions, and I can pass them on to Annie if you're interested. If you're struggling in any of these things, trauma, isolation, substance misuse, etc. Remember, all these groups do exist, and we're both great advocates of AA, of NA, of CODA, Codependence Anonymous, of Al-Anon. These are all fantastic groups that will provide you with wonderful support. So go along and meet some really lovely people, because you will, and they are safe places, great places to be. All right. Going to say goodbye for now, and we'll catch up with Annie another time. Bye-bye.